great pleasure. That's great. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Father Simon Sleeman, OSB. You will know that Simon Sleeman is a Benedictine monk, beekeeper, naturalist, and presenter of the Mindful Monk series of videos on nature, psychology, and spirituality. I think many of us would agree, Simon, that your video work, particularly during the pandemic, was a great source of insight and guidance. I say that personally, and I know that others have experienced that too. So for this point in time, I want to say to you, if you can unmute for one moment, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to give a warm round of applause for Father Simon Sleeman. Thank you. Over to you, Simon.
Okay, thank you, Helen, for that. Am I audible? I am, I hope.
Very audible, very clear.
Great. I noted that we're in a soul cafe this evening. I thought that was a lovely idea, and it does suggest interaction. What I want to do is pray, spend a little time praying and reflecting, and then say something about Saint Benedict, and then maybe pray at the end, and then go into the question and answer, give you some sort of structure on the event. So I've been here over 50 years now, and Saint Benedict says, you know, when a person comes to the monastery, what you have to ascertain is, do they seek God? Not whether they found God, but whether they seek God. And that search has really gone on for 50 years. And I'm not sure I'm a huge lot wiser at the end of 50 years. But what I would say is that my obsession throughout this time has been to see what works, you know, what brings life. If Christianity is to be about anything, it has to be about, you know, enhancing our lives. It's not about duty or morality, you know, it's about, and I always take the piece from Psalm 91 as my sort of, my go-to. The just will flourish like the palm tree and grow like a Lebanon cedar. Planted in the house of the Lord, they will flourish in the courts of our God, still bearing fruit when they're old, still full of sap, still green. Well, that would be my hope and ambition, that would somehow live one's life in a way that would maintain the sap and keep the greenness. That's what we're after. That's what we're after. Now, St. Benedict says, he says in his introduction through, he says, before you begin any good work, pray God earnestly for a blessing for that moment. So I'd like to take a moment to pray, and this will take a moment or two. I'm going to lead you just through a short meditation, and then I will switch mode. So just for a moment, we'll pray a blessing. God the Father, grant us open hearts to the power of your Spirit as we gather to seek you and to support each other as we seek you. We need reminding from time to time about God. To someone to say God to us. That God is sovereign. God is with us. To name God when the name of God may become blurred or distant. God, maker of the universe. God incarnate in Jesus Christ. God pouring out his Spirit on creation. I'm terrible at names, you say. I say I understand. Here is the Father who loves you. Here is the Christ who saves us. Here is the Spirit who makes it possible. Reminding us that God loves you. Christ saves you. The Holy Spirit is wooing you. Here, now, in this place, at this time, with these people. God, a person to be worshipped, followed in time and place. Oh, teach me in each moment of every now to know that you are the here in all my wandering and the yes in all my wondering and the love in nothing less than everything. Amen. So I will reflect a little piece on Benedict and what I think he can say to us as people who are seeking God. I think I'd say, first of all, is that, you know, it's been my weakness. The primary concern of spirituality has begun with ourselves. It's switched completely from God. And there is a danger that God becomes marginalized or slightly on the sideline. I certainly have found that, you know, if there was a prize for reading self-help books, I'd have won it a long time ago. I'm well over, as someone said, the legal limit for self-help books. And I'm taken by the word follow, the imperative. You know, Jesus is, there's no ambiguity about what we're to do. Repent, believe, follow. That it's not a suggestion he's making. It's not a question of imitating, it's following. And Christianity, therefore, is not a skill that we learn or acquire. It's not a strategy we work out. It's not just something we trust or believe. We follow. It's one foot in front of the other. We choose to be influenced, shaped by God's sovereignty. And it is a risk. It's a risk because we don't know what it means. If we know what it means, then we're not following it. If we've mapped it out already ourselves. We follow the one who knows what we need for life. So it's a radical decision to follow my Lord and my God. My Lord and my God. And it demands from us obedience, listening, attention, acting, patience, all qualities that we know are countercultural. We know our culture is in a hurry. Impatience is probably one of the greatest dangers for us. Shortcuts, instant gratification, a passion for the casual and for distraction, noise. And we also live in what I like the term golden calf country. So many idols, life depending on one's status, on what one has. And there's a danger we move from following Jesus to getting something out of Jesus or from Christianity. God on our terms. We want him to put the finishing touches to our life's plan, And I love the image of David facing Goliath, which is what we who are living monastic or aiming to live are facing in culture, facing Goliath. David knelt down, took off his armor, and knelt before God, took off his armor and knelt. So Benedict, what has Benedict got to say to us as we try to follow Christ? He was born in 480 into a culture in Rome. He was well educated. He was born to a culture which was not unlike our own. You know, it was collapsing. It was morally bankrupt. The Roman civilization was collapsing. And he recognized that it was bankrupt, and he recognized that he would not find fullness of life living in this particular culture. You know, it was not going to be possible. So he took the option of fleeing and setting up his alternative culture. In other words, the monastic culture was his alternative, designed specifically to promote growth. He says in the prologue to the rule, as for he or she who's making progress in the religious life and in faith, their heart opens wide and with joy too great for words, which comes from love. They run ahead in the way of God's commands. Those are wonderful things. The goal for Benedict of monastic life is that your heart would enlarge with love. I often think the abbot should have a stethoscope or whatever you'd measure the heart and say, listen, each year we behold in, and has your heart enlarged? And if it hasn't in the last year, what have you done? Or what's not happening in your life to facilitate that enthusiasm, your heart opening, running with joy? You know, that's what it's about. That's what it's about. And that's what he wrote his rule to establish, a culture which would lead to that fullness of life. And I always think it's interesting to ask oneself, if you were designing on an island, if you like, that you arrived there with a group, and you were going to design a life to facilitate contemplation, to facilitate growth, spiritual growth, what would it look like? What would it look like? What would you have people commit themselves to doing? I think that's a key question and worth just thinking about for a moment. You land on an island, a group of you, you want people to grow spiritually, to be aware of divinity. What are the crucial things that are needed? And for Benedict, obviously, God is the foundation of everything. God, the foundation, and the power of the Holy Spirit. But he must have thought, I have the rule, I must just get it down. The copy of the rule. It's such a tiny document to be so influential, you know, since 480. I mean, there aren't too many, I doubt Ryanair will still be going in another 1500 years. This is, whatever's in this is still working. So it's it's extraordinarily brief little document. It's probably one of the most influential documents in Western civilization, in the sense that monasteries carried civilization through the Dark Ages. But he must have thought a long time. It's called a rule, but it's not a rule. It's really a program for life. You know, how will we live life and live it to the full? And, you know, if you were beginning your document, the first word would be really key, really key. And he must have thought long and hard about it. And the first word he chooses is listen, listen. And I think that's key to all our lives, no matter how we lead them, but listening. And, you know, we often think we're good at it, but it's always a challenge to listen. Because A huge part of our brain is given over to sight, and a much smaller part is given over to hearing. So it actually requires much more effort than seeing, to hear what the person's really saying. What is the person really, and letting them know it. So Benedict's first word is listen. So he aims to create space and time for the action of the Holy Spirit and for God. He doesn't presume to say how it will work. He doesn't clutter. His spirituality in the rule is as much about good housekeeping and timekeeping, time management, as it is about the spiritual life. You know, how you are to sleep, where you are to eat, how you are to sit, in what order. Because he doesn't presume to legislate for the Spirit or for theology, but that's the work of God and the Spirit. But he has to create the conditions where the monks don't kill each other and that you live in harmony and peace. So that harmony isn't the word I'm using. The community lives together seeking God. But you know, he then uses a really strong metaphor to describe a monastic community, the monastery. He calls it a workshop. A workshop. Now, a workshop, it's not a spa. Yeah, I thought I was going to a spa. You know, I really thought this was going to be, there's a great line I came across in, I can't remember where it was now, but suspended in a saline solution in a Californian flotation tank, listening to Bach. Now that was my idea of the spiritual life. You know, if I could achieve that, I'd made it. It took me a long time to recognize the wisdom and the rightness of the metaphor of workshop, because this is not an easy task we're taking on. This is not an easy task. It's not a guest house. It's not an elite spiritual center. It's a workshop. And it needs tools. And he lists 72 tools that you have to use, you know, he prescribes. So I think that's you know, that is a good it's a constant corrective to me, that what we're engaged in here is something pretty robust and challenging. Now, I don't know how you do, you know, we live in a community and we're all here and there's a structure which helps us and holds us. I don't know how I have to be here because I wouldn't do it otherwise, to the extent that I do. So that's that idea of the workshop, that this is a challenge. Then I think it's interesting what Benedict chooses. What does he choose people to commit themselves to? What are if you're on your island with your group, what are they going to have to vow? What are the vows? The three cardinal things that they're going to have to commit themselves to. And again, his vows are interesting. From some of you may know them, may have heard them. The first one is obedience. Obedience. And obedience in the sense of ob audere. Obedience is, if you in Latin, is ob audere, to hear, to listen. In other words, listening is so important that he says it's a vow. That's what we need to vow ourselves to. Listening to the other, creating space for the other. Hospitality, hugely important to Benedict. Hospitality to the other in our hearts. Listening, developing that delicate instinct that can respond to the call of the other, the call of the Spirit. So that's the first thing he says is an absolute prerequisite, is committing oneself to obedient listening. The second one, again, is unusual. It's stability, stability. You know, we all are going to want to move on. The grass is going to be greener elsewhere. And he says, no, you stick it out. You stick it out. You stay put. You stay put. Committed to the place and to these people, to this place. Anselm of Canterbury says, you know, a restless monk, and Benedict is very scathing about restless monk. They're like a tree that after being frequently transferred or often disturbed will not root anywhere and withers and dies. You know, we've got to put down roots and stay the course, stay the course. It's going to get rough. It's going to be good, but it's going to get rough. And you need to commit yourself through a vow to stability. It gives time and structure to hold you there and to go deep. And the third vow, everybody thinks they're poverty, chastity, and obedience, but the third vow is conversion of life. You're committed to grow. Now, I used to think conversion was about change, you know, Newman saying to live is to change, and to have changed often is to have lived well. But these days, we live in a culture where you change everything at the drop of a hat, you know, you've got to get the latest thing. So I think growth is a more helpful way of looking what needs to happen. And to grow, you need to change. But as I say, I think change has become, we get the latest phone, the latest car, the latest whatever it is, you keep changing things because that keeps you happy or tries to satisfy your happiness. Growth has to do with timing, waiting, maturity. You know, it's slow, it's requires tending. So those are the three things he says we need to commit ourselves to in this project. Now, none of those vows are ends in themselves. If they are, they're, you know, it's misinterpreting. They are to create an environment to facilitate. He wants to create a psychological, spiritual environment where growth can happen. And he says those things are essential. And there are two things, only two, that Benedict says are not allowed. And it's not sex, it's not drink, it's not rock and roll. He says in chapter 34, above all, let this evil, if it appears for any reason whatsoever in the least word or sign, if anyone is caught at it, let them be placed under very severe discipline. Very severe discipline. And that evil is murmuring, he calls it, murmuring. Again, I think that's extraordinarily insightful. Murmuring. We all know what it is. Carping, criticism, negative, whatever term you, discussing the brethren, you know, bringing them down. And the reason he wants to root out is because it brings down energy. It's corrosive. It saps creative energy. And it's so easy. And it's so easy when you work with a group or you live with a community, because after the weather, the next thing you want to talk about is, did you hear what X did now or Y did? It's so easy to default to that position. And it's Benedict's biggest enemy of monastic existence is murmuring. Again, I think that's an extraordinary insight, because there was a geography department in some university and it was failing. The energy was low. So they do what anybody does now, is you bring in a consultant and pay them a large sum of money to tell you what you know. But consultant came in and examined and said, every time you exchange your currency, the currency you exchange in this group, it's all negative. It's all negative, you know? How can you expect to find energy in your group working together? Change the currency and they change the energy. If you find the energy where you are low, I suggest, and I know it from here, that you examine the currency of exchange between people. What are they exchanging when they meet? We need to be vigilant of it, very vigilant, because for Benedict, this is the heart of the moral life. This is the heart, because through murmuring, you can destroy life. You know, you can destroy life, or you can build it up. There was an old monk here, Father James, and he was very overweight. I remember he was put on a diet and he was given Rivita for supper. And he'd grab the Rivita, you see, and eat them, but then he'd take the supper after, the main dish. And no one had the courage to tell him that it was meant to be one instead of the other. But he used to say to me, I was running the school, I remember, and I'd meet him sitting there in the refectory and say, keep up the good work, keep up the good work. And I'd be off like a shot with a pep in my step, that he had facilitated life. I think it's something we need to be very mindful of.
Click on that box over there. Your speakers, no, your speaker, no, not that one. The one above it.
Oh yeah.
No, click on that. Just there. It should take.
Simon's muted. Simon's been talking now, muted.
Okay, I'm back. There must be murmuring going on there. Someone was murmuring there. Anyway, yeah. The second thing Benedict said is detrimental to our possessions. Now, one has to have certain possessions, private ownership, because they clog or choke our spirit. You know, they build defenses. We can build defenses with stuff. We all know that. And we all have built kingdoms or queendoms. It reduces our vulnerability. There's no doubt about that. And Benedict, again, he says to the abbey, he says, watch out now. These guys, you check under their beds because they're going to try and have stuff and they'll hide it. So again, Benedict is not being mean, ruling out this. He's just recognizing the potential danger of possessions. And possessions are not just things. Possessions can be skills, they can be intelligence. And I think really one that I experience in myself is about time, how avaricious I can be about time, the possession of time, obsessed with my time, you know, and how generous can I be with my time, And Benedict warns the bursar, and I was bursar for many years, that you make sure the brethren have what they need so they can't complain. Every chapter ends with, don't let the brethren complain. So those are just some of the bits that I find very potent as I reflect on what it means to live monastic life. And what's really surprising, and everybody's always aware, that Benedict says about prayer, You know, he says loads about community prayer. I mean, he's lots and lots about that. But private prayer, he says, if you must, then let it be very short. That, in other words, the quick of monastic life is community, the community, the workshop, the working together, the praying together, the eating together, the rubbing off each other like the poor oyster with a bit of dirt that gets into it, that by irritation, it creates the pearl. That's how it produces the pearl, not out of any goodness. It surrounds the piece of dirt and creates the pearl by the irritation. And I can tell you, that's a lot of monastic life, is living together as a group. It's very countercultural, you know, to listen in a world of noise, to give up possessions, the extent that one does, and the conversion of life, to maintain stability. All these things are really, you know, countercultural in the world we're living in at the moment. So I'm conscious of my time. Just one, I do want to suggest one thing, because I think you guys are out in the real world. And the whole notion of parish, I came across this, the whole notion of parish really is collapsing. I met the local parish priest today, and he was saying, you know, my church is going to be empty 20 years' time. And I don't see the church making any adaptation to the changing situation. You know, parishes were based on tightly knit, stable, unchanging communities, local, you know, accessed by foot very often. That's for so many churches. Now they're loose knit, you know, they're changing, they're fluid, and we need a different type of ministry. And that's what I think. It's not a question of modernizing the churches. It's a question, I think, monasticizing them, you know, providing local spiritual hotspots, if you like. The churches are not just for devotional worship. They're where spiritual direction will be available, where meditation will be taught, where interiority will be fostered. You know, the great, Sarah Grant said this, and I think it's the most one, the great disillusionment with the church is not about abuse. It's about its incapacity and lack of willingness to deal with the interior life, to deal with interiority. That's what's missing. So I think that's where the response of the church needs to be, providing these centers of ritual, which is, I mean, spas know how to do ritual a whole lot better than most churches, you know. I mean, if you go to, you know, they've got incense, they've got candles, they've got music, they've got a whole atmosphere that makes you want, because they want you to feel different, they want you to experience, but you always come out missing something. And that's the bit we have that we need to provide. But you can't just have a little bit of incense at the bottom of a boat. Incense needs to be billowing, and candles. And that's just a little hobby horse. Now, I want to end up by just a little reflection on the tent of meeting, There are two great mystical traditions, and I think for years we missed out on one, and now we're overemphasizing the other. The first one is the eyes closed, is a simple way of saying it, the apophatic, mind empty, meditating. That's one tradition. The other tradition is with the eyes open, cataphatic, icons, sounds. You know, the world is charged with the grandeur of God, Germany Hopkins, or Love Nico Kazantzakis says, I said to the almond tree, speak to me of God, and the almond tree burst into blossom. So these two traditions cross-fertilize. I'm not suggesting for a minute that they're exclusive, but I think it's important that we recognize both. An example of the apophatic one that I would use would be the Jesus prayer. You know, I find that a very soothing and easy thing to use, repeating the holy name. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. On the cataphatic side, I have an icon, and you can see it in the back here. It's a healing icon of Christ. an image, you know, you can meditate on the image, rest under the gaze of Christ. So just to finish off now before we go, I want to do a short meditation, which I'm calling the tent of meeting. Because I find the whole notion of the heart, you know, going to the heart, I find that a bit abstract. I get the idea, get out of your head, down into your heart, but I love the idea of the tent of meeting as a place of prayer. And I'd like to lead you to my tent of meeting. And before I do, I'm going to read just a little bit from Exodus 33. Moses used to take the tent and set it up outside the camp, some distance away. He called it the tent of meeting. Anyone who sought God would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. I think that's interesting. That in other words, you're going to meet God, not demanding he show up in my heart, if you like. It's going off piece, going away, going to the tent of meeting. So if you just close your eyes a moment, and I'm going to just bring you to my tent of meeting, and then I will bang a gong when we're finished, and we can go to questions and answers then. So I am on a path. I leave my house, and we're now on a footpath. And the footpath winds along into a woodland clearing, And there's a small wooden hut. With little windows. I open the door, you open the door. And inside, there are 2 chairs in this place of meeting. Because we're coming to a meeting. There's a candle burning. There's an icon present. There's a notice board where I put my requests for prayers. People I've been asked to pray for. And notes for God. I settle into my seat and let go as best I can and breathe. Present to God, attuned to God, and responsive to God. Ours is not the work of seeking you here or there where we think you might be, but of opening the heart's door. And when we do this, you cannot resist coming in, since our opening and your entering are one. You knock and wait. And when we open, we find that you were there all along and will not leave us. So we extinguish the candle, get up from our chair. We bless ourselves and leave our tent of meeting in whatever form that might take, that sacred space. And close the door. So if there are questions or comments or whatever, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Simon, for leading us in that beautiful prayer at the end and bringing us through so many different images in your talk. I'm just conscious of you talking about golden calf country, and I thought that just captures something. But I loved at the beginning where you mentioned Psalm 91 and the effort is to maintain the sap to keep things green. And that's the loveliness, inviting us into the loveliness of our belief. And so there are lots of things that I find very refreshing in what you spoke to us about. And on a very practical, just a very practical question to you, I want to ask you, are you going to continue the Mindful Monk series? Because I found myself, as I said, going there quite frequently during the pandemic and finding it so helpful. But I also realize that that type of work is a type of work that demands a huge amount of effort, particularly as a lot of us now are embracing so much technology. And perhaps because you have that experience, you know, I don't know if you have anything to say to that. I'm asking you, is there more? But actually, you've given us so much already.
Thank you. It was, thank you. It was, I was in a very fragile place at the beginning of the lockdown, and I did want to do something as a response to it. And I felt moved through that. And I felt it good to end it at the point. And just at the moment, I'm reflecting on what actually, whither my work should go, and I'm sort of praying about that and listening to you know, it's an important time for me just in my own journey, and I'm just taking things slowly, open to whatever comes on. But no, I've no immediate plans. And yeah. And thank you for the compliments. It does take a lot of work. It does take a lot of work. There's no doubt. But it is work one can do, and it does reach people. You know, you'd be a long time getting that number of people here. So it does. It has an outreach, but it needs to be of the spirit guided, and I'll wait for that.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Thank you. So I invite, if there's anybody else who would like to ask a question, to unmute and to add your question at this point. It would be good. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Helen, ask Father Simon, that he works so much with bees, and how does he find working with bees and with nature helps his own life, his own spiritual life?
It's a good question. And, you know, it's always been part of my, it's never been a sort of conscious decision. Nature's been always, I'm in it. I've always been in it. But bees are bees have been a wonderful hobby. I've kept them for 40 years. But, you know, my experience with bees now is the less I do or manage them or do with this, beekeeping is a misnomer. The less I do, the better they do. But I do find them a tremendous source of wonder. And as I say, after 40 years, I mean, imagine if you were keeping cows, that, you know, after 40 years, there wouldn't be too many things a cow could tell you. But there's certainly loads you can learn from bees. But the one thing I really don't, I think there's a huge reaction that so many people are keeping bees now. And it's a typical human reaction to an obvious problem, which is the lack of pollinators. But what's tending to happen is people can now get loads and loads of bees. The poor native ones that are trying to eke out a living are being displaced by these cosseted ones in their nice homes, you know? The answer isn't more bees, the answer is more food, biodiversity, plants. That's what we need to do, rather than keep more, you know, as I say, the human reactions, oh yeah, everybody keep bees and we'll solve the bee problem. No, because that's only displacing the poor. You know, we need to be so aware of nature and how it works before we start. We haven't a good record of doing things in a balanced and sensible way when we're trying to redress the mistakes we've made. That's a bit of anyway, the bees are wonderful, and it just to go out and watch them pouring in with pollen, and you know what is, I mean, they go out in the morning and some of them are going out to collect water. There's a pond up at the guest house. I see them there. And some are going off collecting. And who in the morning says, now listen, lads, off you go. Would you ever go get water? You go get something else. You stay in front of the hive and guard it. I mean, just to ponder the complexity of decision-making and how it's arrived. We haven't a clue. So it's wonderful that there's something like that we were so, you can be so in awe of. And they've been here for 50, 60 million years, you know, a whole lot longer than we have. And we're trying to manage them. You know, we want to, that's, yeah.
Simon, I read recently his statement, we cannot find God because God is the one who's looking. And I'm trying to marry that with the concept of me seeking God. I'd love your comment on that, please.
Yeah, that's a very big one. What's your name?
Brian.
Brian. Give me that again. Yes, the whole idea that you can't see God because God is seeking you. And then we're seeking. Yeah, you know, I think the more I go on, the more it's a mistake in any sense to try to conceive of God. In other words, our small minds, there's a tremendous danger we domesticate God, we reduce God to manageable proportions. And I think, in my experience now, that it is a question of me, my belief. I think faith and belief in God is the quick, and that the action of God in my life is unmistakable and undeniable. It's undeniable. But as to fitting that into some concept or something that I'm comfortable with, not possible for me. It's much more to do with a presence and a huge, the God is so enormous and extending of me, I suppose. Now that's a very inadequate answer, Brian, but I think our crucial role, I do think that we have, our previous generations, God was absolutely central, especially in Ireland, those prayers for God was so central. And now God is at the margins. And even in my own life, it's very easy to get sidetracked by myself and my fulfillment and what I'm doing and how I'm praying and all this sort of thing. Whereas it's what God is doing. And there's a whole lot going on, much more going on than we are actually aware of. I think that's and that we're so limited in comparison to God that somehow I've got to stretch myself and suspend the need, the sort of rational need I have for control and management, and that's so typical of today. That golden calf country, which is a phrase I got somewhere, but that idols, that we become gods, and we have gods, and to hold ourselves in that space without those, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, especially in the culture that we live in, which is absolutely littered with idols and consumer, we're treated, people nowadays are this is going way off Brian's eye, they're treated little better than animals in certain ways. People are meant to be consumers of stuff. You're happy in production. It's really, the way we set up culture is so making life deteriorate for people rather than enhancing it. It's frightening. I find frightening. And that's way off your question about God, but God is ever moving and ever, but as I say, the evidence in my life of his action and the action spirit is ungainsayable. That's what I suppose that's what I bank on.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you.
Simon, I was interested in your point about the lack of nourishing interiority in parish or wherever we find ourselves. It's not just about the sexual abuse, because I had a conversation today with somebody, it was actually a group, and we were just saying how we're marginalized in society as anything to do with organized religion or religious kind of affiliation. There's an anti-sentiment, and I just thought that was really important, that maybe our emphasis has been on providing services, and sometimes that provision of services have been empty of building an interiority within those whom we give the first level of need, which may be the services, but we have neglected that soul, so I just thought it was really, for me, it hit me when you said it, so thank you. And
I just think there's and I think it's disastrous at the moment. It's so, that I spent a long time reflecting on this, because my education, my religion, that was all about exteriority, behavior, grades, attending mass, attending these things, nothing about what was going on in my interior. It was out of bounds almost, and I think and it's worse. It's getting, not better, in the sense of phones and that people are being taken. The evacuation of interiorities it's and that's with all the addiction, because if there's people will fill up with something, they're going to reach for something, and that's, I'm afraid, And this we're providing, John O'Donoghue used to say, a new pedagogy of interiority. You know, people are going to be lost. So I as I said, G.H. Lawrence was my great first person who introduced me, who recognized interiority. And Freud and Jung and Joyce, they were all saying, guys, you're way off. You've got to come back. You know, Joyce was excavating that. D.H. Lawrence was all about exploring the interior. You know, so we've been there have been prophets telling us but unless the church attends to that, there's no hope of people staying, I don't think. And ritual can spring off that. Ritual is crucial, but not as something imposed and, you know, as something imposed without any connection.
Thank you very much, Simon. You have brought a lot to us this evening. I am finding myself going back to what you said in relation to Benedict. It's a workshop, not a spa destination. I think that's such an important and interesting image. And also when you mentioned the murmuring and changing the currency, changing the energy, that struck me. And then about the enlarged heart with love, you know, there are lots of things that you have given us this evening that will remain with us, because these are very strong images, and that's your gift, your ability to be able to bring us in a refreshed manner back to these things, and again to be reminded that we are following. We're not perfect, we are following. So on behalf of our group here, I want to say a very special thank you to you, and that you are helping us not necessarily to evacuate interiority, but to aiding us towards that again and again. So I want to invite everybody, please again, put your hands together to give a round of applause for Father Simon Sleeman. Thank you. Not good at unmuting for claps. Just one last thing. I know that I know Suzanne, I'm putting you on the spot now, but you did want to say something about Sheelan in June, and perhaps Bernadette, you might say something about Ruth Harvey in September, just before we go, if that's okay.
Sure. Yes, just a little reminder, we shall be having another speaker on the 9th of June, and her name is, as Helen said, Sheelan Harkin. She's a young American mother of 2 little children. She's a very interesting lady. I spotted her on a podcast called Buddha at the Gas Pump, and just was taken with her poetry. She's a poet. And Father Simon, you mentioned a couple of more images, the countercultural questions that we ask. And I think Sheelan does this. What she speaks about is sort of countercultural. And your other image of the pearl being formed by the irritation, I think she will link it into that as well. So I think it promises to be another interesting evening. I'll be sending out a reminder email or a newsletter. So if you're not on our mailing list and would like to be, I can add anybody in. But you'll find this event on Eventbrite shortly. It'll be up probably next few days. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Suzanne. And Bernadette, just about Ruth.
Yeah, just to say that we're very pleased that Ruth Harvey, she is currently the head of the new leader of the Iona Communities Church of Scotland, brought up in Glasgow, wide experience of social Christian movements. I would imagine that she would be very much like coming from an engaged contemplative position. and very much involved with the divine mystery. And I think she will connect with some of the stuff that Simon has so beautifully shared here this evening. So again, we will probably give you more detail closer to the time. Thank you.
So thanks everybody again, and again, thank you, Simon.
Thank
And
you.
yes,
Thanks, Simon.
really good evening. We very much appreciate it.
Great. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
All
you.
the best. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.